We have come to the end of the second and final day of questioning of the former Detective Chief Inspector of the Special Demonstration Squad, Keith Edmondson. And similarly to the majority of the last few days, Keith has been evasive as possible. If anything, he was even more evasive over the last hour and a half or so. We've had the further questions for him. I wouldn't say that gave out particularly very much light either. He did wish to sign off by giving a little speech about commending the proper work of many of the members of the SDS, who he's very privileged to work alongside. Unlike the final closing words of many of the non-state co-participant witnesses, there was no applause. I'm joined by Evelyn Lubbers of the Undercover Research Group and Zoe Young of the Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance. What did you make of what Keith has had to say to us?
Well, it was a bit, he didn't really need to emphasize that he was proud of having been a manager of the SDS, because he was breathing that, he was sweating that. It was like his entire personality was sort of, like with Lambert, sort of grown into the SDS and Special Branch. And while the last 2 days were nothing but incompetence, things that he didn't remember, things that he hadn't done, things that he should have done, it made you wonder what a manager of the SDS did in general at all, other than saying there's no boundaries, just do what you want, go for it. It was really, really difficult. And, you know, that final thing really closed the door for me, so to say.
Zoe, what do you make of it?
See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, follow the golden rule, which is protect the SDS. Break the law in every which way, misrepresent yourself in court. To see a policeman just sort of saying this to a judge presiding over a public inquiry, that it's absolutely fine to pretend to be somebody else in court because nobody knows any different, and to expect that to be a positive, I found just quite surreal. And then he passed this little note as well, which was then read into the record, which I found quite hilarious, because I don't know if that was meant to be like, you know, we're all on the same side, me and the judge, we're passing a little note, you know, oh, well, this was the proper way things should have gone 30 years ago, why didn't they? It turned out he said something about AGM, and so they thought it was some attorney general, and clearly the inquiry people were not very impressed.
It was a bit of a sort of a stepping stone towards the final bit, where he said that he was so proud to be an SDS, an SB officer. It was really.
I was very taken with the comments he made about when it was pointed out that there was a change in the tasking of the SDS. Following the arrest of Jeff Shepherd, following the intelligence that was gathered by HN1, the cover name Matt Rayner, where it was made clear that the SDS now had a dual role. As well as the collecting of intelligence, they were expected to process some of that intelligence into evidence, which could be used in a way in which would not implicate the intelligence gatherers, so that activists could be prosecuted. And he said that this was something they'd learned from the RUC, that the RUC ran a separate intelligence and evidential section, and that the SDS was starting to work with SO13 in order to transfer this intelligence into evidence. And it was put to him by Sarah Hemingway. It was like, so they were laundering the intelligence. Laundering.
Yeah.
So Sarah Hemingway intervened to say that so in many ways the SDS was laundering its intelligence into evidence. And he said, oh yes, that says it much more elegantly than I ever could, and accepted the concept of laundering. And I think that that's that one word, specifically that, is very much worth keeping in mind when we talk about what was wrong with the approach of when we saw it, exactly the same thing happening when Lambert was an undercover officer with the Operation Sparkler, and the prosecution of, again, Jeff Shepherd, the first time Jeff Shepherd was jailed, along with Andrew Clark, for the planting of incendiary devices in Debenhams. For someone who was a senior police officer to admit that they were laundering evidence, I was possibly one of the most shocking things we've heard at the inquiry so far.
Yeah, and it's very weird in the context that when I'm trying to explain why SDS undercovers are different from undercover officers that, are brought in for a shorter time to collect evidence that's then brought before a court. The difference is that in a criminal case, the evidence is being checked and scrutinized by a judge. Even though judges these days don't go that far, there is like a process to see how the evidence was collected, whether it was done according to the legal framework that is in place for that, which is not enough. I know all that. But the big difference with the SDS is that they are collecting intelligence and that it is never scrutinized and that they never have to explain how they found it. And we've seen so many pieces of evidence, or evidence might be examples of where that went like really wrong. I won't go into that too long, but there's supposed to be a very big difference between undercover officers collecting information for intelligence purposes only, and undercover officers in criminal cases collecting evidence to bring for a court. If you take away that dividing line, that wall, so to say, you're going to get like this is a very important difference as well, that secret agents, intelligence agents don't have the power to prosecute people, because otherwise, they can just go, they can collect intelligence whatever they want, make up facts whatever they want, and then decide people need to be prosecuted, which that is the danger of that is shown by the SS in the Second World War, like a secret police that had the power to prosecute. And in fact, that is what they were trying or willing to do with Kurt, who had not done nothing wrong, but just was in the way.
Just to give context for that, so Edmondson was asked about Operation LFU, which was Let's Fuck Up, and the name of the person, which we're calling Kurt. Kurt was someone who was involved in activism tangentially from what Jenner's deployment was, but it was enough connected with anti-fascism that there was a fear, because he was based locally to where Jenner's family lived, that he may kind of expose Mark Jenner as an undercover officer in some way. So like rather than move Jenner, they decided to try and fuck up Kurt's life by putting him under 24-hour surveillance, in the belief that at some point he would break some law and they could prosecute him. As it turned out, he didn't break any laws, so they were unable to prosecute him. Now, Keith Edmondson made a shocking defense of this, saying that when it was put to him that this wasn't the cause of justice, that this was quite improper, he said, oh no, well, if he had broken a law, that would have been fine, because that would have been the course of justice, because he would have broken the law. I mean, quite insane.
But he said, oh well, we were going a bit of a long way round. Yeah,
it was the wrong way round for it, but nevertheless, it was justice.
I just found that gobsmacking. I mean, LFU, and to be saying that in this, again, in front of the judge, and he wasn't apologetic.
Not at all.
And then to come say, oh, but I've been working with all these lovely chaps and I'm very proud and things. And you're literally trying to put an innocent person in prison. They were trying to find a reason to put the guy in prison because of where he lives. Just think about that. It's boggling. But I wanted to go back to something that happened earlier. There has been really not enough questions asked about the relationship of the intelligence being gathered by SDS and the media, the reporting of particularly family justice campaigns. We've heard about how they wouldn't possibly have wanted to gather any dirt on Doreen and Neville Lawrence, who have become, well, you've got a baroness, and the Daily Mail decided at some point, maybe 10, 15 years ago, that they were good people and that they were not to be smeared. And so they're not been gathering dirt on them. And they used the word sacrosanct. This guy, several times he used the word
Yeah, very
sacrosanct
strange.
about this particular set of grieving parents. But then when we had an example from, I think it was the Evening Standard, a report about Joy Gardner,
Yeah.
who was someone else who, I mean, she died in the hands of immigration agents.
Well, no,
wasn't
it was police officers. It was
actually
police officers, but they were doing an immigration raid.
Yeah, and they bound her up with tape all around. And I mean, I lived in London at the time, and I was on the demos about that. And I really remember her mum's speech and how moved and shocked we all were, because she had this length of tape. It was like, who would bind up a woman who, she'd been a civil servant and she was not, but somebody managed to get some dirt about she'd had a Barney with a former boyfriend, and that was in the media, as if she somehow therefore deserved what was done to her. And this aspect of what the SDS were doing about smearing, gathering information that could be used to smear families. This is something that Peter Francis spoke about right at the beginning. And I don't think it's come up nearly enough in this whole process, because who was tasking them to do that? Was that what their customers were asking? Was that a message coming from the media to the police, or was that something that the police were originating themselves? I mean, you spoke about laundering earlier. The police reputation was a big deal at the time. They were not the most popular with a lot of communities in London for good reasons, because of these racist murders or their failure to investigate racist murders. And so they were laundering their reputation, seemingly with the support of the SDS and the intelligence they were gathering.
Yeah, I mean, we saw, it was very clear. We saw the threat assessment, which was written by the then head of C Squad, which was Keith Edmondson before he became Detective Chief Inspector of the SDS. Threat assessment of the what was then the Joy Gardner Fund, which was set up in the immediate aftermath of her brutal murder. Within that, there were a number of key talking points. Those exact key talking points ended up in the Evening Standard article that was headlined that how the SWP, the Socialist Workers' Party, are exploiting Joy Gardner's death. The headline itself was one of those talking points. Some of the other talking points existed within the article. The article was a clipping. The reason that the inquiry brought up the article, and when they first said it, I was like, oh, that's good. For one of the few times that the inquiry has decided to use contemporaneous media reports to cross-reference against police reports. But no, this clipping had come from the Special Branch's own archives that had been kept alongside this threat assessment. It would have only been from like a week or so later. Like he said, there was no link whatsoever, and that was a ridiculous suggestion. But quite frankly, you can't look at both that threat assessment and that article without realizing there is a connection.
Absolutely, and especially the amount of times that friends of mine, activists that I knew, were suddenly on the front pages with all sorts of dirt about them, a lot of it made up or over-egged or, distorted, and basically turned into a smear. And at the time we were like, we were also sort of battered from, constant repression on the streets, but then to have this kind of media assault as well, and that affects you really deeply. Just your whole wider community, your sense of self, your sense of like, what is the fourth estate? Where are the investigative journalists who are actually looking into the actual secret political police actually preventing progressive social change in this country? And who are these people that are doing this, that are gathering this information, and on whose say so? Who is initiating this? How has this process happened through the system within the police? Is it coming from the Home Office? Is it coming from certain political groupings within who? Where?
Yeah,
why aren't we having these questions asked?
No, it was brought up, but it's always easy to hide behind the very layered processes. Like the SDS will always say, we just gathered the intelligence as we were asked, and we put it in, and we have no way. We don't even know how it was processed and how it was brought to the customers. So it would go to C Squad, or it would go to the Secret Service, to MI5. So it was out of their hands. Basically, they couldn't help it. They didn't know. They just did what they were told, and whatever was done with the intelligence, they wouldn't know. But I do agree with you that even questioning Edmondson in the last 2 days, he wasn't asked where was the information going, like when it was about co-option between Special Branch and McDonald's in the trial against London Greenpeace. It was made too easy for him to say, I don't know, I can't remember, I have no knowledge of that, because there is evidence that there was co-option and collusion, and there has been a settlement between Helen Steele and Dave Morris and the Metropolitan Police just after the McLibel trial back in the 90s. So it's just made too easy to say, like, there was also the industrial desk, or later on a desk that communicated with large corporations. We know that he even told us that there was a list X with large corporations that would get intelligence from MI5, and he claimed he didn't know. He knew it existed, but he didn't know which corporations were on there. And it's just, that co-option, that collusion is very important, and I do agree that it's not being pushed enough in this inquiry.
Yeah, I mean, that came up again when he was asked about information being passed on to the Economic League and the Consulting Association. He said that there was no direct contact from the SDS, and he couldn't be drawn on whether other units, other sections of a Special Branch were in communication with them. It was one of those ones where he was quite adamant. Oh no, the SDS didn't do that. Oh, there would have been other desks possibly, but he wouldn't know. I think he could have been pressed further on that, because he didn't. I mean, the fact that he immediately recognised the Economic League. We also saw earlier on the paper trail that existed of information about department stores having protests by anti-fur activists outside being passed on to Sears, who, I mean, let's be honest, I mean, if they're on the bloody list X, then Christ, I mean, everybody must be. The list X being companies that are supposedly have some connection to national security, though from what we understand, many of those companies are very tangentially connected to that. But because it's the UK economy as well as the defence of the realm or whatever. So I mean, the idea that there was the intelligence within SDS was kept securely within the SDS, which is a line that's been fed to us for the majority of the last however many years, I think really kind of has fallen away completely now. We also saw the way in which even kind of small operational decisions of exfiltration strategies where officers would be moving to in order to withdraw them from the field were being passed up the chain to right to the very top. That senior management of Special Branch and the Met Police in general were aware of all sorts of aspects of how the SDS were operating. We know the Home Office themselves were signed off on paying for Andy Coles's negative equity to be paid off when he had to move. We know that HN1, a cover named Matt Rayner, that his undercover deployment was brought up at a ministerial level. I think the most interesting things that we've learned from Keith Edmondson today are the things that happened above him. We saw a litany of cover notes which had handwritten things on them, directing them to be sent to much senior management. I think all of that is the useful part that's come out of his evidence.
Yeah, just to go back really briefly to the about the media. So if people have been trying to get anonymity for themselves in the inquiry, but if their name has been mentioned in the media in association with activism, then they have not been able to get anonymity, it seems. Now, some of those people did not necessarily want to be in the media associated with activism, and it seems like, perhaps the way the intelligence was gathered on them and then communicated to the media led to them being reported on or smeared or pictured on the front pages, etc. And because of that, which they didn't choose, they are now in a position where they haven't been able to get redactions or privacy around their names. And it's once again it's full circle. It's yet again a way in which the perpetrators are being protected. The police get all these layers of protection and anonymity, whereas their targets, just for wanting a better world, are exposed again and again.
I'm aware that we've had feedback that when there's the drill in the background, it is very distracting on the video. Is there anything else you'd like to add about Keith Edmondson's evidence over the last 2 days?
I'm glad it's over.
Yeah, fair enough.
What? I mean, God,
Yeah.
it just
As I've said before, I'm sure he must have been a very, very good rugby player, because that was the only way that he was ever going to ascend through the ranks of the special branch.
the brotherhood of the rugger buggers.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who has been part of the Fraternal Order of Rugby Union, I'm all for rugby union, and I don't. As a Welshman, obviously it's very different, but I'm not about to disparage that. Anyway, the point is we're glad to be finished with Keith Edmondson. Tomorrow we'll be hearing from Steve Tiddy, who I think the most notable thing about Steve Tiddy is that a number of officers, particularly Mark Jenner, was very dismissive of his talents. And we can only hope that the fact that his intelligence has been besmirched so heavily that perhaps he is more willing to be candid about some of the undercover officers who he served as a detective sergeant for. After he's finished giving evidence tomorrow morning, we'll be hearing from Helen Steele, finishing off her evidence that she started last Friday. Tomorrow is an early start. The hearing will start at 9:30, which means the broadcast will be starting at 9:45. We'll see you then. Thanks for joining us. Please like, share, subscribe these videos. It makes a huge difference about how we're able to